All righty, welcome in a new edition of the Chico Bormann Show, latest edition of the Chico Bormann Show here on the Big Play Sports Network. Every time I say new edition, I think of new edition. Ronnie, Bobby, Ricky, and Mike. I love the girl. Who cares who you like? Cool it now. Yeah. Well, I just did that on air. Cameras. Yep. Red lights on. Love New Edition and Cool It Now. One of my all-time favorite songs from one of my all-time favorite bands. Anyway, welcome in. Chico Bormann Show. We got much to get to coming up in a bit. Well, the NBA season, Cavs I shouldn't say barely. They comfortably got by Memphis in the second half, but it wasn't a good first half. They trailed at the intermission against a bad Memphis team who doesn't even have they're a shell of what they once were with Ja and Jaren Jackson, all of those guys. So they got by Memphis. We're all just sitting here. I mean, we're waiting for the playoffs to begin, like everybody. They've got a big one against the Indiana Pacers coming up on Friday, tomorrow. They also have their final game will be Charlotte, and then it's how healthy is Donovan Mitchell and all of these hiccups of late. Can it be taken away? Can it be cured? Will it be washed away? And this is the new look Cavaliers. I don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. But the season is coming to a close. It hasn't been, and they've had there's more injuries here in the second half. They've also had 7 back-to-backs. Not an excuse. It is what it is. But I know as well as you do, and you've been reminding me quite often. They have a bad showing in the postseason. JB's probably gone. I think he's done a pretty remarkable job this year, but it's all about what you get done in the postseason. We'll talk to Mitch Lawrence from Sirius XM NBA Radio coming up in just a bit. Bohm joining me, producer Michael Bohm. Bohm, are your retinas still burning from the eclipse?
Chico, I was fortunate enough to have the glasses, which I gotta say did help, because I did try watching it, like before the actual eclipse happened. I did try watching it without the glasses. Couldn't stare at it for too long. My eyes had to reacclimate.
Very dangerous. Yes.
Yeah. But no, it was that was something, Chico. It's just surreal to see it dark outside at 3:15 in the afternoon.
Yeah, it was. I'll be honest with you. In the lead up, and I didn't get. You mentioned those glasses. I didn't get the glasses until that morning. I was out and about, and some lady had. She was like giving them away. She had stashes of them. So my immediate thought is, they can't be real then. They're fake. But they were real and spectacular. And so I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to check it out. It was very cool. And then, Cleveland getting a lot of the, like New York was getting the Cleveland feed. So, we were kind of on the big stage there for the eclipse as well, the Final Four. How about the women's NCAA tournament? Man, that was, and the numbers board out. And I don't, this is not about, I think, so many people after Iowa lost to South Carolina, and look, South Carolina with that kind of size and their bench outscored them like 40-0, something like that. But I've said this for a while. The NCAA tournament, and UConn won the men's side, and the women was won by South Carolina. We were fortunate to have the women here in Cleveland. It's just the men's tournament is still a lot of fun. This year was the perfect storm for the women, and good for them. They had stories that were stories last year. I mean, Caitlin Clark was a story of college basketball last year, and then back for another year. And then you had, Paige Beckers and UConn and, South Carolina undefeated. It was the perfect storm. And what happens with the women's game is and it did, as I said, perfect storm. Caitlin Clark became a household name. It's hard to get household names anymore in men's hoops because they're usually gone before you really get to know them. And I'm not complaining about that. It is what it is, but I wasn't surprised, and I don't think it's, it's some fluke. No, you're going to need the Caitlin Clarks of the world, but Beckers is going to be back next year for UConn. Maybe she becomes, that face of college basketball for the women. But I wasn't surprised at all. I thought it was great to have everybody in town here in Cleveland, our city, kick tail again, as we usually do on the big stage. But that was, that was a lot of fun. And then you had people staying over. That was the other thing. You had people staying from the women's Final Four going, well, hey, the Eclipse is the next day and the Guardians have their home opener. Why don't we just stay? So, Cleveland was one big party for the entire weekend. Bohm was probably playing on some rooftop somewhere. I don't know. But, Guardians off to a pretty good start. Although the Shane Bieber news, by the way, we're going to be talking to Booney coming up tomorrow, Brett Boone. I can't tell you the obscenity-laced text that I sent Brett, because I found out right after we taped with him last week is when I found out the Bieber news. We're going to get much more into that tomorrow. But, man, Bohm, I mean, I know you still got a season to play, but that came out of nowhere. Pardon the pun, came out of left field. And I just, wow, Shane Bieber done for the season.
Chico, this feels eerily similar to when after the Browns beat the Ravens, and then you get the Deshaun Watson news. After you're riding the ultimate high wave of the season, Deshaun's best performance of the year, and then 3 days later, out for the year.
Now, Joe Flacco comes in to rescue the Guardians rotation. Yeah. That will be, he's already popular. He would take it to new heights. Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a break. We come back. This guy's, he always takes it to new heights. We're talking NBA. We're talking Cavaliers limping literally into the postseason. 2 more regular season games. We'll talk the entire NBA playoff picture with Mitch Lawrence, Sirius XM NBA radio, and longtime New York Daily News columnist. He joins us next on the Chico Bormann Show right here on the Big Play Sports Network. Just 2 regular season games remaining for your Cleveland Cavaliers as they literally limp to the finish line of the regular season. They've got the Indiana Pacers coming up on Friday, followed by the Charlotte Hornets. They are currently 47-33, a half game back of New York for the 3rd seed. Been a while since we talked to this guy. Let's talk some NBA with our good buddy, longtime New York columnist, and of course has covered the NBA for many, many years. Also now with Sirius XM NBA Radio. Mitch Lawrence joins us here on the Chico Bormann Show. Mitch, how you doing, buddy?
A big welcome from Cleveland. I am happy to be on. I want to get the pulse of Cavs Nation from you, and I'm ready to talk a lot of NBA. We're almost through with the regular season slog. Now we got to put up with the crazy playing game. I know Atlanta, Chicago will get about 8,000 fans in the building and about 200,000 will watch it on TV, but that's Adam Silver's problem. How you doing, Chico?
I'm doing well. I gotta ask you. So just real time here as we tape this on a late Thursday morning. As I'm walking in, I got the news that O.J. Simpson has passed away. And I was talking to Bohm, my producer, and I said, you know what? I guarantee you, because I can remember the split screen. I remember watching at home the playoff game, and one side of the screen was the game. The other side of the screen was O.J.'s Bronco. And I said to Bohm, I'm like, I guarantee you Mitch was at the Garden covering that. You were probably covering that game, right?
We're talking about Knicks Rockets 1994 NBA Finals, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And I can't remember if it was what we later called the Sam Cassell game. Sam was a rookie all the way back then. And he had an amazing, I don't know if it was that game, but he had a game which basically went wild against the Knicks. For a rookie to do that in the finals back then, unless your name was Magic Johnson or Larry Bird, was crazy, but Sam did a great job. But anyway, it was a surreal night at Madison Square Garden because back then we didn't have cell phones. So what people were doing, there was a buzz created inside the arena that people went out of the arena to go into the concourse area where the concessions are, because that's where you have the TVs up there.
And this is the finals game.
Watch this.
Yeah, and this is a finals game. That's what's crazy.
This is the finals game.
Yeah.
But it was such a huge, who was bigger than O.J. Simpson back then for your people here who are listening and watching this? I mean, O.J. Simpson back then, he was in movies. He was in a ton of commercials. He was like Shaquille O'Neal back in the day in terms of commercials, right?
Yeah.
He was Mr. Hertz. He was in a lot of stuff. So he was this gargantuan celebrity. And all of a sudden, he'd been implicated in this grotesque, horrific double murder involving his wife. And now he's in this chase with his buddy Al Cowlings. I watched both of those guys play for USC back in the day. That's how far back I go, to the Rose Bowl against Ohio State and Jack Tatum. Something going like, what? Like everybody else is like, what is going on here? Is this actually, you couldn't even wrap your head around.
You couldn't. You're right.
This whole thing. And now there's this crazy Ford Bronco chase. And I'm telling you, it was a surreal night at watching the basketball, the finals, and then having this happen as we're, now it would be no big deal. We see stuff on the news all the time happening as it happens in the moment, right? Back then, it was a new thing, especially helicopters chasing. I heard that was I later read that was one of the first times a news team got involved. News teams got involved in a helicopter chase involving a crime that was kind of unfolding. So, and just on a personal note, I covered the Buffalo Bills way back before this, about 14 years before this day, for the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle. Rochester is right, as you know, near Buffalo. Interestingly enough, a huge Cleveland Browns fan base there, because before the Bills, the Browns were the closest team to Rochester area. So anyway, but I was covering the Bills, and there was a couple of times where I wanted to talk to O.J. Simpson, and O.J. Simpson was a great interview, the nicest guy you could deal with, a guy who one time when I was looking for him, he tracked me down to return calls and found me. He went out of his way.
And nobody usually does that. Of course,
a legendary running back,
yep.
Not just at USC, but obviously for the Bills. And to have this whole thing happen back in that time with the whole trial and the whole chase thing, that was also what was so surreal, because he was such a popular, enigmatic figure. It's like nobody hated OJ. He was just so beloved by a lot of people, whether you were Bills fans or not. I mean, and it just, everything went south on him. So, I mean, it's quite a story. It's really, when you think about it, Chico, the fall from grace of American, I don't care if they're sporting legends or whatever, this has got to be one of the top few.
Easy.
Because the guy was so big, he was so popular, he was in movies, he was so beloved by a lot of people that he took a fall into the abyss that you couldn't quite believe from where he was.
We're talking to Mitch Lawrence. Yes, we're going to talk some NBA here in just a moment. I did not realize that you had covered the Bills. So you covered a little bit of OJ towards the end of his career.
I covered the Bills back when they had Joe Ferguson and quarterback Joe Cribbs. This is pre-Jim Kelly.
Yes.
This is the case after Chuck Knox left to go to Seattle. Case Stevenson was the coach. They were trying to get, obviously, Jimmy Kelly out of the USFL. He came in a couple of years after, but I was there, and the Bills had Freddie Schmerlis, Jim Haslett. You remember those guys?
Yep.
They had a really good team before I got there. I covered them. They were like 2-14. They were awful. Fred Schmerlis was a riot to cover. He was great. They had a great tradition that people still talked about from the 60s when they were in AFL power back then, but they had fallen on some hard times. And like I said, this is pre-Jim Kelly when all the winning started and Marv Levy.
All right, so getting into the NBA, I'll tell you what, you came on, and I love how you do this. We always, every time you and I get together, you're like, hey, I want to get the pulse of, kind of what's going on in Cleveland. Before we do that, I'd like to get what's your not your assessment, or like what do you hear? Now, you obviously you follow the sport, but like from an outsider looking in, what is your assessment right now of the Cavaliers as we end the regular season?
They're really so far below the radar. They are not talked about at all. What do we talk about in the East? We talk about it's a Boston Celtics, like the Boston Invitational. Like they should waltz through this thing to get back to a finals, which they won't, of course. We talk about them. We talk about when it comes to Milwaukee, just the worst possible year you could have, the dysfunction, now culminating, which looks like it could be a season-threatening injury to Giannis, and all the things that have gone wrong in Milwaukee this year. That's talked about. Philly's talked about because of Joel Embiid and what's going to happen in the playoffs now that he's back. And then the Knicks are talked about because of Jalen Brunson and the winning that they've done despite losing Julius Randle and OG Anunoby and the great job Tom Thibodeau's done. The Cavs are one of the other teams that nobody's talking about them. Nobody's talking about Orlando. You get a little bit of Miami because of what happened last year. Now people are still thinking a lot of Heat are dangerous. They can get back from a play into a finals. I discount that totally this year. I think that's a one-off. I think they're done. They're sunk. Now watch them go off on a huge run. But the Cavs, nobody's even talking about where Donovan Mitchell's going. There's no interest in the Cavs. They're basically a team that will come out of if they make a deep run in the playoffs, which nobody's really counting on. But then all of a sudden, people are going to go, wow, look at this. We didn't expect this. So they're really kind of like one of those teams that just doesn't have any cachet, and I mean, people in Cleveland might think I'm nuts, but nationally, they don't move the needle one iota.
That's fair. Okay, before we go to break, let me ask you, would it surprise you to know that basically since last year's first round series loss to the Knicks, even throughout this regular season, and they had a lot of injuries. You mentioned injuries to Milwaukee. God, that people still right now, it's almost like they can't wait for JB Bickerstaff to. I think some people in this fan base would rather they do poorly to see JB get his pink slip. I really believe that.
But you know what? That's not unusual. I'll make this quick. Going into last year in Philadelphia, people wanted to see Doc Rivers fired. Some Sixer fans didn't want Doc Rivers anymore. Going into Milwaukee's playoff run, there are Milwaukee fans who are like, we're going backwards here. If we lose again, Mike Budenholzer needs to go. There are people in New York who think that Tom Thibodeau should. Hey, that's the nature of the beast. That's the nature of the beast. I'm sure the only people who don't have that this year going into the playoffs, probably Joe Mazzulla, although there might be some Celtic fans who say we got to win, and if he doesn't, he's out. But like Mike Malone is basically safe in Denver, right? Coming off the first and only championship, I don't think there are any fans going in there going, we need to lose to get rid of Mike Malone. Everybody else is basically fair game.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Hold that thought, Mitch. We're going to take a quick timeout. When we come back, I want to talk about, is that fair? You're right. It is part of the game. It's part of the business. But if you really break down this season, and we will do that under JB Bickerstaff and, of course, what's coming up for the postseason. We'll do that all ahead. Coming up with Mitch Lawrence, longtime NBA columnist, now with Sirius XM NBA Radio. I'm Mike Chico Bormann. It's the Chico Bormann Show right here on the Big Play Sports Network. Alrighty, welcome back. Mitch Lawrence joining us as we talk some NBA. Cavs down to their final 2 regular season games. They've got a big one coming up tomorrow on Friday against Indiana, and then they will, hopefully be able to get a W against the Charlotte Hornets. Not a good basketball team on Sunday. And then we get ready for April the 20th and the playoffs, and what is this team going to look like, and who's going to be healthy, who's not going to be healthy. And Mitch, let's go back to what you said before the break. And I think you're right. Pretty much every city is dealing with, hey, what have you done for me lately? And although the Cavaliers last year did win 51 games in the regular season, took a big jump, that it wasn't just losing to the Knicks in the first round. It was the way they lost to the Knicks. It was an embarrassment. It was, oh my gosh, at times you wanted to close your eyes. And some fans here just haven't forgiven JB. Now, I understand that. I would also say that when you look, they had a period here in the early part of the season, and even coming from camp into the regular season, where Darius Garland's out and Evan Mobley's out, so he didn't even have his full complement. Then he finally does. Garland goes down, Mobley goes down, and we're talking for like 6 to 8 weeks, and all of a sudden it's like JB, some magic elixir he puts on them, and they're playing great basketball. So I guess what I'm saying is, look, I understand what the fans are saying, and I guess the reality is if it is a quick first-round ouster, he's probably going to be gone. I just don't want to just completely gloss over what he's been able to do and the team's been able to do amidst all the injuries.
He changed his offense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they've totally changed their offense from what they were when they lost Mobley and Garland. Now, in terms of, the playoff result, if they finish as the higher seed and lose to Orlando, let's say in the first round, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Because Orlando is a young team, no playoff experience. You got to figure the lack of playoff experience should hurt them against Cleveland. But look, the onus is going to be on the Cavs to show us that they can do more offensively than they did last year against the Knicks. Was a disaster, especially Donovan Mitchell. Now, Donovan Mitchell is an acclaimed all-NBA type player, sometimes borderline all-NBA, definitely all-star. For me, he's always come up a little short in the playoffs. He did in Utah, but Rudy Gobert got the blame out there. It wasn't Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah.
Donovan Mitchell had more media support. That's the way it works, as you know, in these towns. If the media is behind a certain player in a two-player system, and let's say that one player who's better with the media has more failings, he still might get a break from the media, and it's portrayed as the other guy's fault. Well, that's what happened. That's what happened in Utah a lot with Donovan Mitchell. I remember he came up short in a lot of playoff situations, had some awful playoff moments out there in Utah. Anyway, look, he turns, it's a new deal in Cleveland, right? He's got a whole new team to kind of like forge his playoff identity going forward. He got off to a miserable start last year. So once again, and forget about the outside noise about do the Knicks want him or is he going to leave? This year is a year where I think Donovan Mitchell has to play up to the expectations that a lot of people still have for him. I don't have a lot of great expectations for Donovan Mitchell, to be honest with you. I think that he's a very good player. He's an all-star type player. He's a regular season star who has who steps back in the playoffs, like on a more minor scale, a Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid is the reigning MVP. Joel Embiid has been highly acclaimed as a regular season star, and usually what happens in the playoffs, he comes up short. He's never been out of the second round, right? And in this year in Philadelphia, even coming off this injury, which knocked him out for a long time, now he's been back for a few games. There's going to be a lot of pressure on Joel Embiid to finally get to that third round. Well, in a way, they're a lot alike. Donovan Mitchell, I think, has to do his best here, or else people are going to really start to change the story, change the narrative on what he is. Because let's face it, you know this as well as I do. What you do in the regular season is great, but your legacy, how you're remembered, is all about your playoff, not your personal production. It's your team. What you do to help your team go deep in the playoffs round after round after round. This is for Donovan Mitchell, a huge playoff season, right?
Yep.
I mean, I don't want to, unless he gets hurt against Orlando and they go down in flames, if he's available for all the games, I think Cleveland will be favored, should be favored, and he needs to get out of that first round the worst way.
Yeah, and I think last year, there was plenty of blame to go around from JB right down to the last guy down to the roster. But you're right. I mean, you're expecting a guy like Donovan Mitchell. And
Starts
I think
with him.
Yeah, what's interesting with Donovan, and you mentioned it there at the end, God forbid he gets hurt, this knee, he had a nose fracture too, but this knee has been bulky. Last night against Memphis, and again, they didn't get off to a great start. You know as well as I do, and everybody knows, Memphis is a shell of what they once were with all the injuries. They needed to kind of, okay, we got to come back. They needed a big second half, which they got, and Donovan looked good. But, I mean, Mitch, it's as simple as this. As much as they've tinkered with the roster and they've gotten more shooters around him, and hopefully a guy like Jared Allen's going to play tougher in the paint. Bottom line is, if Donovan Mitchell is not Donovan Mitchell who can explode off the dribble, and that's what he was missing with this injury. If he becomes just a guy that, okay, well, we'll let him shoot the ball, the Cavs are done. I don't care if it's Orlando or who it is. They're in big trouble.
Well, and then you have to worry about going forward, how much you want to extend him. Do you want to resign? If it's an injury that's going to be career altering,
right?
We can't pay him max money. That's the way it goes. So
Sure.
we'll see what happens with Cleveland. I mean, they are, believe me, going into this playoffs, there will be so much interest in Boston, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, New York, that Cleveland, the Orlandos of the world, they're like afterthoughts. So in a way, that's good because they're operating with less pressure on them nationally. Now, locally, that might be a different story.
Sure.
But in terms of the national expectations, the Cavs are just not moving the needle.
Okay. Mitch, let's go to the top of the East. We'll stay in the East here for a little bit. Boston Celtics, as you said, I mean, expectations are they at the very least get to the finals, maybe win it all. They're 35-3 at home. They have been unbelievable this year. They needed to get better defensively. They did. Offensively, they're number one. Are you buying? It feels like a lot of people lately, last couple of weeks or so, I could see Boston maybe not getting to the finals, and that includes even, like you said, the injury to Giannis. So what is Boston's kryptonite, if you will, in terms of what might derail them?
Themselves. Well, you mentioned their home record. Last year in the playoffs, and this will be a huge story in Boston because they have the home court throughout, right? Because they'll have the best overall record. Last year, they were 5-6 in the playoffs. 5-6. This is the Boston Celtics. Back in the day, when I was covering Larry Bird and Parrish and McHale, 6 playoff losses. You're lucky if you went in there and beat them once on their home court. They lost 3 times to Miami in the Eastern Conference Finals, including a Game 7. That will be the big story in Boston this year is how they protect their home court. That's like the overall big picture story. And I mentioned they're their own worst enemy. They're the ones that can beat themselves. Why? Because their 2 best players are prone to doing stupid things at the offensive end in crunch time. 19, Jason Tatum standing out there dribbling 19 times in a 1-point game and then shooting a fadeaway at the end of a 24-second shot clock. They have to me, those 2 players, the rest, they're kind of a low IQ NBA team in terms of making the right plays at the right time, execution, that type of stuff. They're great players, don't get me wrong. They just make some idiotic decisions late in games, which is a hallmark usually of the immature, young teams on the rise. These guys have been knocking on the door for a while. So every time they screw up at the end of a playoff game, you're sitting here going, why hasn't Jaylen Brown learned you can't dribble 15 times and then pass to your teammate who 3 on the 24, and then he passed right? I mean, it's just like a circus at times.
Yep.
Well, you figure this year, maybe Drew Holiday, his presence, he's an elite player, especially at the defensive end, but offensively, he knows about playmaking, right? And he played for a championship team in Milwaukee, and he's a big offseason addition. Maybe you think that his presence in playoffs down the stretch of these games is going to all of a sudden work to their advantage. That's what, if you're Brad Stevens and Joe Mazzulla, that's where you hope for him that the smarts comes from him in terms of setting up the offense and in getting these teammates on the right path as he experienced it with Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's still a big if to me. That's to me, my biggest concern about Boston is if they're taken deep into a playoff game, Chico, where they have to execute offensively down the stretch. Will they implode as we've seen over the last couple of years, or will they have that growth step that shows they are a championship team who makes the right plays down the stretch of a game?
All right, when we come back with Mitch Lawrence, we're going to wrap up the East. Is there a team kind of, on the periphery there that might be making some noise? Philadelphia getting Joel Embiid back. Is it too little too late? We'll talk to him about that. And also the Western Conference, the Denver Nuggets. Wow, a lot of people's favorite to go out and repeat. We'll discuss that when we come back as well. Mitch Lawrence again joining us, longtime NBA columnist, now with Sirius XM NBA Radio. It's the Mike Chico Bormann Show, and it's all right here on the Big Play Sports Network. And welcome back. Mitch Lawrence joining us from Sirius XM NBA Radio, longtime NBA columnist. He knows the game in and out. Always fun talking hoops with him here on the Chico Bormann Show. Mitch, let's wrap up with the East, and I guess I'll do it with this because we've talked about our Cavaliers. We know the Knicks, Jalen Brunson, and they're without Julius Randle, though, for the season. Is there a team among, say, Indiana, Philly getting Embiid back? Didn't sound like you were buying with the Miami Heat. Is there a team that you think could surprise and be ready to give Boston or another team some challenges here?
Well, New York and Jalen Brunson is a great story. Whether they have enough without Julius Randle, and who knows how good OG Anunoby is going to be. I mean, Jalen Brunson is a legitimate. He's not going to win the MVP. You have 5 places on the MVP ballot to put him. He'd probably be anywhere from 3 to 5. He's not 1 or 2. He might not even be 3 in some people's books. But anyway, the winning that the Knicks have done in the last couple of years with him is more than they've done in the 20 previous years before in terms of regular season wins. Now, playoff-wise, it's going to be harder without a Julius Randle. So I'm kind of discounting them in terms of a deep playoff run. The obvious team to me is Philadelphia because you not only have Joel Embiid, and it's important that he came back for the last, 6-7 games because of timing-wise for him. That's always important for players who miss that much time. The thing that people don't talk about nearly enough to me is the Nick Nurse factor. Nick Nurse, to me, is one of the elite coaches in the NBA. He's the guy the Milwaukee Bucks should have hired. He's the guy they were interested in. He went to Philadelphia, and they hired his assistant, Adrian Griffin. Now it doesn't look like that much of a disaster as it was when it unfolded, Chico, but we know what happened in Milwaukee and Doc Rivers. But don't discount the Nick Nurse impact. That's a big upgrade over Doc Rivers. As a matter of fact, that's why I'm really hoping it's a Milwaukee-Philly first-round series because you'll have that dynamic. Doc going back into Philly against his team, but you're going to have also the Nick Nurse influence on the Sixers this year, which before Joel Embiid got hurt was tremendous. Now they've obviously gone down in the standings. We knew he was going to go down without him. Now he's back. Are they capable of a deep run? Getting the team to a conference finals where he has to do the heavy lifting. I think they have the ability to do that because I think they can take Milwaukee if they play him in the first round. A compromised Giannis with that team, it's going to be hard for Milwaukee to get out of that series alive. Maybe, I don't even know how many games they'd win. 2 against Philadelphia if they don't have Giannis or if Giannis is messed up. So I'd look at Philadelphia as the obvious choice to be that team.
Okay, quickly moving over to the West. OKC, wow, nobody saw that coming. Incredible season. They're a game back along with the Wolves, game back of Denver. I guess I'll start with this. The gap between Denver and everybody else in the West, is it the same or greater than the gap between the Celtics and everybody else right now in the East?
I think there's less of a gap because you have better teams in the West.
Okay.
I think you have, if you had Minnesota in the East, I might pick Minnesota over Boston. I might pick Oklahoma City. The problem with them is they're too young and they're too small.
Yeah.
Really, up front. The team that you should not discount, and since we talked about my career back before talking about the O.J. Simpson, the car chase game, and I talked about the Buffalo Bills. Well, I also started to cover the NBA in the mid-'80s in Dallas. So I keep close attention to the Mavericks. I also live in the area. And I'm telling you what, to me, there are 3 teams in the West that can win it. Denver, who I'm picking to repeat. Minnesota, who's good enough to give Denver a big series. And Dallas as the 3rd team because over the last 25, 30 games, they've improved their defense.
Oh,
Luka and Kyrie are kind of on the same page.
Hottest team going right now in the NBA.
One of the best turnarounds. Jason Kidd has done a great job. I discount just about everybody else for various reasons. I won't bore you with the details, but I think Dallas has a great chance to go pretty deep because they've made the vast improvement where you have to in the playoffs in terms of now they have to prove it still.
Sure.
Because last year, hey, they were an awful defensive team. Are they the defensive team they're showing in the regular season? We're going to find out in the playoffs right off the bat against a I mean, the Clippers have, they got Kawhi Leonard. We'll see what shape he's in. Paul George, James Harden, Russell Westbrook. That's going to put the Mavericks defense right there on the spot. Can they continue this great turnaround defensively to go deep in the playoffs? I'm gonna hedge my bets, and I'm gonna say actually yes they can. And then you got to stop Luka and Kyrie at the other end. So they look like a tough out. But the Denver margin, they know they're going to get a big fight from Minnesota. They know they'll get probably a big fight from Dallas. And then, they'll obviously, Mike Malone and his guys will tell you, well, we got to worry about Phoenix and the Clippers and the Lakers. And, but they're more, the West, just look at the play-in team's record for the Western Conference team versus the Eastern Conference. I mean, the East is bad. The West is a very dominant, great conference. The East is a good conference with one great team.
Did anyone down there in Dallas ask Kyrie what he thought of the eclipse on Monday? Just curious.
Good point. I don't know if he partook in that or not.
Probably.
That's a good question. He's actually been on his best behavior.
He has been.
He hasn't said anything nuts. And it's like he and Luka, who kind of like were playing together last year, but they weren't really meshing and stuff. And you kind of wondered, it was my turn, your turn type of offense. Now it seems to be more cohesive. It makes more sense. And those two guys Luka will obviously be a MVP candidate. He won't win. They don't have enough wins. I still think it's going to be Joker and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The race between them, I would give the edge to Joker, but Jokic. But no, Kyrie and the Mavericks this year have had a great season, but it's one of those deals where now we're going to see what you're all about, because it's all about the playoffs. They know that.
Yeah. Last thing for you before we get a prediction from you. Imagine that the Lakers, for the most part, they've had guys healthy, but it goes back to, do we need to replace the coach? Is Coach Ham what are your thoughts on the Lakers right now? And LeBron, now we're, LeBron and Bronny coming to the NBA. Who knows?
Well, he's running, LeBron, this is it. I mean, you're running out of time.
Yeah.
He has a team that was very much compromised by some injuries to some key role guys. Gabe Vincent, who's Jared Vanderbilt. I mean, if they had those guys all year, they'd probably be right now a playoff team, maybe sixth. They probably wouldn't have to be in the play-in, but they didn't. So LeBron's had to work more. He's had to play more than he wants to at this time of his career, this time of his life. I can't pick them to go deep. I think that they're just going to come up short. Now, last year they had a great run, and then they got swept by Denver. Now, you got to realize it's only the third time LeBron's ever been swept in his life. But nobody talked about that. He didn't talk about that. As a matter of fact, after Game 4, when he got swept, he floated out this notion about, I don't know about my future. So everybody pounced on that. I don't think he wanted people to talk about the fact that he got swept. He got swept out by Tim Duncan, Cleveland, right? 207. He got swept out by the great Golden State team with Durant. I can't remember what year that was, their championship year. And he got swept out by Nikola Jokic. If they meet the Nuggets again, he'll probably get swept out again. But I'm discounting the Lakers as a big-time championship contender. Will they make a little noise early? Maybe. We'll see.
All right, your finals prediction as we close up shop here, bud.
It's been what I said from day one, Denver, Boston. I picked that going into the year. I didn't think anybody would catch up with Denver out west in terms of who could beat Joker 4 out of 7 times. It's the old Jordan thing we used to talk about. When Jordan was at his heights in the 90s, every season you go, is there anybody you can envision beating this guy 4 times out of 7? That's how good Nikola Jokic is. If I'm putting that back type of thing, that measurement that I used to use for Jordan with him, it's almost like Shaq Kobe too back then. It was like, who could beat these guys? They'd have to beat themselves, get an injury, whatever. And then Boston, I figured Boston would be the cream of the crop of the East. I thought Milwaukee and Philly would be the other best teams. And those guys, if you look at it just from where it's fallen into place for Boston, it's been a great year because their biggest competitors have suffered the worst type of dysfunction and injuries that you could have. And I'm talking about, obviously, Milwaukee, and I'm talking about Philadelphia.
I got it, real quick in closing here, because I think it's hilarious. We talk about the long, crazy regular season. I was thinking about this as I was getting ready to talk to you. I was thinking about this last night. I believe you and I were on the air. We were talking to each other when the news about Budenholzer was gone, and it was going to be Terry Stotts. And I remember you saying, yeah, it's Terry Stotts. And then all of a sudden I'm looking at my feed with my laptop, and I'm like, Stotts is out. Doc Rivers is in, because Stotts had a thing with Adrian Griffin. Like, that just tells you. And now all of a sudden, Giannis, all of this is taking place in one season.
Right. Well, here's the deal. Budenholzer gets fired. They hire Griffin. Now, Stotts has already been hired. We might have been on the air. This might have been when Terry Stotts got fired. What was it, in like 3 days into the camp, or it was like close to the season? I mean, it made no sense. I thought it was a great hire because he had worked with Lillard for 9 years.
Right.
And I thought at least that end of the court, he would take care of how to figure out the Giannis Lillard 2-man game, and then Adrian Griffin could take care of things defensively. That thing blew up in their face. The Doc Rivers thing, he's got way more losses than Adrian Griffin. That's blown up in his face. Now Giannis gets hurt. It's kind of the perfect capper to what's been a really bad season in Milwaukee. They made all the wrong moves, and now it's coming back to bite them. And look, the big thing is Giannis is, I saw a quote from Doc Rivers about, Giannis's availability in playoffs. I don't know. We hope, my God, this is now, the playoffs are starting in 9 days, and you don't know about Giannis Antetokounmpo? That's bad. That ain't good.
Well, my friend, it is always a pleasure catching up with you. And, of course, as we get ready for the playoffs, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and appreciate your time as always. Be well, and hope to talk to you soon.
You too.
Buddy. All right.
All right. Thanks, Chico. Good talking to you, man. Take care.
You got it, bud. You too. That's Mitch Lawrence, again, longtime NBA columnist, and currently with Sirius XM NBA Radio. Love catching up with him. Great breakdown, not only of the Cavaliers, but across the NBA. We'll take a final break. We'll come back, wrap it up. More to come right here on the Chico Bormann Show on the Big Play Sports Network. All righty, welcome back. Wrapping it up here on the Chico Bormann Show on the Big Play Sports Network. Good stuff, great stuff, as always, from Mitch Lawrence, longtime NBA columnist, now with Sirius XM NBA Radio. You heard him say there from the very beginning, I always like getting that outsider point of view. And he said, well, nobody's really talking about the Cavaliers. I'm happy about that. That's fine. I know sometimes we heard it during Brown season. How come more people aren't talking about it? I'm fine with people not talking about us. That's fine. Go and do your thing. But, I'm concerned just like you guys are. Now, again, I know many of you have been on the fire JB thing for a while now, but I don't want to say it all boils down to Donovan Mitchell, because, look, they tinkered with the roster, and there's some key guys that need to step up. But in the end, if Donovan Mitchell is not 100%, boom, if Donovan Mitchell cannot explode, and by explode, I mean, he creates off the dribble, and guys are fearing him going to the hole. They're fearing him stepping back and shooting, if he can't be all of that, I don't even think it matters who their first-round opponent is. So hopefully last night against Memphis was a glimpse of what we see from Donovan, and he has more time to rest, because they need him to be as close to 100% as possible.
Yeah, Chico, frankly, I think it is a concern. Like, what percentage of Donovan's full potential are you going to get here as we wind down the season? Because that performance against Memphis really felt like the first time that he showed those signs of returning to old form. But that injury with his knee, that's something that lingers. And it's hard to imagine that he could potentially rack up enough rest days to return to 100%. So that's my biggest concern going into this postseason, Chico.
Yeah, there's a lot of what ifs. I think on a much smaller scale, a guy like Dean Wade possibly being done for the season, that was going to be a guy that I thought was going to be a huge addition in the postseason this year.
He took a jump this year.
Yeah, that now all of a sudden is not there. So anyway, we'll see what happens. Cavs winding down the regular season. Before I get out of here, got to mention our boys from Tipico, Boom. I don't gamble that much at all, Big events come around. The Masters, it's Masters week. It actually begins today, although they got some rain in Augusta. I put a little penny or two, Bohm, on Will Zalatoris. Last year it was Victor Hovland. I think he finished top 5. Zalatoris is coming back from a back surgery from a year ago, so he had some pretty. I think he was 40-1. Scotty Scheffler right now is playing out of his mind, but there you go. So poor Will Zalatoris will probably be slamming his trunk sometime tomorrow late afternoon. My sincerest apologies to him and his family. All right. Thanks to Mitch Lawrence, again, Sirius XM NBA Radio. Thanks to you, Michael Bohm, producing, and all of you out there. And don't forget, we also we're going to be talking some baseball, some Guardians going around Major League Baseball. Why this sudden spike with injuries to these pitchers? Yes, some of it's inevitable, but I think there's one big reason. We're going to talk about it with the All-Star second baseman, Brett Boone. That'll be coming up on tomorrow's show, and that'll be out for podcast as well. I'm Mike Chico Bormann for all of us here at Big Play Sports. Make it a great weekend, everybody. See you.